All right, let's go ahead and get started. Um, see some familiar names here, but um, my name is Gerald Bosch, and this is World Wednesday. Um, do this about once a month, just kind of going over some things going on in uh, sort of world news that I think are particularly noteworthy and might easily sort of slip under the radar with so many other things going on. Um, I teach history and geography here at the college. You I've got a couple former students in here. Um, there we go. Okay. Since it's continues to be the biggest story, I don't know, we just sort of start with the elephant that's always in the room, the pandemic. This is actually day before yesterday from the BBC. If you want to find a quick, easy source of kind of global information about what's going on with the pandemic, you really can't um, uh, do better than BBC World News. But I mean, here's the current figures. Um, 2.4 million deaths overall since this was identified. This is all, of course, confirmed. I mean, that's kind of the key thing to bear in mind with these numbers. They're pulling them. BBC's getting them mostly from Johns Hopkins University. You can see the sourcing down there. National public health agencies. These are the things that, based on their best information. There's a lot of uncertainty in a lot of these numbers, and a lot of reason to believe that actually they're being somewhat underreported, particularly when we're talking about total number of cases, simply because there's a lot of cases that simply never get identified. Um, the trends have been bad for a while and continue to be, not as alarming as they were back in January. That huge spike has sort of leveled off, and there's some bright spots in various places, most notably India, which had surged, but now has seen a steep decline in its cases, and the exact reasons for that are a matter of ongoing research at the moment because no one's 100% sure why they've seen this drop off. But of course, the vaccine is rolling out different paces in different parts of the world. But at the same time that we're seeing the stuff with the vaccines, we're also seeing new strains. Um, First the one in England, then Brazil and South Africa. Worth pointing out whenever they talk about this in the news, this is the first place where the strain was identified. It really does not mean it came from there. We have no idea where these strains first popped up. The first place that doctors looked at it, saw it's a new strain, kind of gets the name. So, we really don't know exactly where, and there might be other strains as well. This is very similar to this situation with the flu. I mean, every year there are multiple strains of the flu making their way around. And one of the ongoing things with the annual flu vaccine is the need to balance off the various strains and kind of anticipate which ones are going to be more major and which ones are going to be more minor, and then try to tailor this one shot to address them all. Of course, we've been doing that with the flu for a while now, whereas this is new. This is new stuff here. Um, any questions or anything before I sort of move to other affairs? Okay, one thing that's sort of broken in the last week or so is a situation in Haiti. It's actually not a new situation, but there's been a flare up there of protests against the current president, uh, Jovenel Moise. These protests have actually been going on for a few years. They started in 2018. There was a spike in fuel prices, but this is against a backdrop. I mean, Haiti has suffered a succession of devastating natural disasters, mostly hurricanes. Every major hurricane that's blown through the Caribbean seems to smash Haiti. On top of this, the Haitian political situation has been fragile for a long time. The Haitian economy is not particularly strong. And so there's a whole combination of problems there. These protesters began protesting again 2018. So we're talking better part of 3 years ago. Began calling for the resignation of President Moise and then the creation of a transitional government. Now, he also came in after a very disputed election and the resignation of the preceding president, which has created this thing where the president serves a 5-year term. According to the protesters and the opposition, his term ended last year. According to which would be 5 years from the time of the resignation of the previous president. According to him, he had this year still to serve. He has continued to act as president. He has ruled by decree, in essence, for the last year over a disputed government. Well, now we're at the end of this period, and there's not a lot of signs of him stepping down. This has led to ongoing protests that occasionally turn violent. Most of the protests have been peaceful, it should be said, but there has been some violence and some violent suppression of even seemingly peaceful protests by the security forces. All of this has flared up again recently, and on February 7th, the National Police and the President's Office announced that they had arrested a handful of what they identified as foreign mercenaries in possession of weapons. We're talking about, if you hear that term foreign mercenaries, you get this idea of like some, army. We're talking about 7 guys. But they were arrested and, according to the police, had small arms and were preparing a coup attempt and a potential assassination. Whether that's true or not has been hotly disputed because there's not a lot of evidence one way or another. However, Haiti, which again has a long history of, in the latter part of the 20th century, of political unrest, is going through another bout of this. And generally, because as you can see there on the map, Haiti is fairly close to the United States. The U.S. usually finds itself playing some role in these matters. And so this is likely to show up if this grows into a larger crisis. It might not. Questions? Anything about the situation in Haiti? Okay. For those of you who were around back in November, and I see a couple names here, I was talking about this last time I did one of these. The situation in Tigray, in northern Ethiopia. The initial military operations there have come to an end. Now, just kind of background stuff. Um, Tigray is a province within Ethiopia. The governing party in this province in Ethiopia is the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, or TPLF. Ethiopia, like most African countries, really like all African countries, is a multi-ethnic state. You have a lot of different people speaking different languages. Americans kind of look at this stuff from the outside and see uniformity, but they see themselves as very different. And Africa, the continent generally, is the most ethnically and linguistically diverse place in the world. So there are numerous ethnic groups within Ethiopia, and a sort of staple of modern African politics are ethnic political parties. So parties like the TPLF. Tigray is not just a place, it is also an ethnicity. The TPLF long played a central role in the coalition of political parties that have governed Ethiopia. There was kind of a political alignment or realignment in recent years. And the TPLF kind of found itself pushed out of the center and did not react well to this. As a result, the province has sort of, and the TPLF governing the province have sort of ignored the central government, defied the central government of Ethiopia. Now, this map, with its nice lines, ignores a simple reality, and one that is, again, a constant of politics in Africa. There are Tigrayans living on both sides of that border. There's a large number of Tigrayans in Eritrea. Eritrea used to be part of Ethiopia. It broke off in a series of civil wars that started back in the 1960s. There were problems between the TPLF and the Ethiopian government, but there were also problems between the TPLF and the government of Eritrea. This all turned into a conflict back last November when I talked about it for the first time. Tigrayan forces struck at the Eritrean capital. Now, this is not necessarily an army, these are Tigrayan militias. But the Eritreans struck back. The Ethiopian central government then announced that it was going to engage in a, as they called it, law and order operation. This law and order operation began with massive airstrikes and the introduction of 16,000 Ethiopian troops into Tigray. So law and order seems to be get these people back under the control of the central government, which happened pretty quickly. Within a matter of, less than a couple of weeks, the Tigrayan capital was occupied. The Ethiopian forces basically announced that their military offensive had succeeded, and Tigray is now under Ethiopian military occupation, and there's joint occupation with Eritrea. Unfortunately, this is turning into a looming disaster. Even as this was happening, there was a major outbreak of locusts in the Horn of Africa, so general pressure on food supplies. This was leading to starvation, and things have just gotten worse over the winter. The UN has estimated that as many as 3 million people are at risk of immediate starvation in this region due to a combination. Part of it is locusts and weather, but the bigger problem is ongoing fighting in Tigray, which is stopping food supplies from being able to get to where they need to go. Now, there's been an agreement with the with international food organizations to sort of ease the movement of supplies, but this isn't a solution. And the problem grows. At least 60,000 people fled the area to move to a succession of refugee camps, and really nobody in this region is in a position to take in refugees. So these refugee camps are also at great risk. There have been alarming, that's the phrase that keeps getting used, alarming reports about atrocities on the ground in this area, particularly by the Ethiopian military and the Eritrean military against the Tigrayan population. But there are also a succession of local ethnic militias which are taking part in all of this. So it's all kind of coming together. You've got violence, which is stopping the food from moving. There's not enough food anyway. Harvest was interrupted by the violence, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is a big looming problem. Again, we're talking about 3 million people at immediate risk of starvation. And this in a wider region. You know, if you look across the straits over in Yemen, there's the ongoing humanitarian crisis there due to the civil war that's been going on for a decade. This is a hard hit area, kind of making things even worse. Ethiopia is the major supplier of emergency food supplies, peacekeeping forces. They have been the stabilizing force in this region, engaged in trying to deal with the problems in Somalia to the south, the problems in South Sudan to the north. Ethiopia has taken a leading role in this for years. Well, now Ethiopia is in the middle of an effective civil war with their own set of problems, which means not only are they having their problems, there's already been a border incident between Ethiopian and Sudanese forces. There's ongoing disputes over access to the Nile River and water usage. This is an ongoing issue with basically any major river that goes through multiple countries, but this has been a thing in East Africa for a while. Dam building and how does that affect countries downstream? And so this has led to issues involving Ethiopia, Sudan, Egypt. So there's a lot of potential for humanitarian disaster, political crisis, possible war in this area. And so this is kind of a big potential problem for the future. And of course, an immediate problem right now. Questions? Comments? Anything about any of this? There we go. And then Myanmar. Another continuation of something I was talking about the last time that we did this in November. Back then, there was an election. On February 1st, the uh, military in Myanmar overthrew the civilian government, arrested its leaders, military coup. The most famous of these, of course, Aung San Suu Kyi, Nobel Prize winner, somewhat more controversial in recent years due to her defense of the army's actions against the Rohingya minority. Aung San Suu Kyi was arrested by military forces. She has been charged with illegal importation of walkie talkies. This is an obscure law. And basically, the walkie talkies that we are talking about are radios used by her personal security force. That this, like 20 or so walkie talkies, she's being charged with this and could be sentenced to up to 3 years in prison for having done this. Now, Aung San Suu Kyi, in fact, has spent a lot of time in prison in Myanmar for her opposition to the military government. I'll get a little bit more into that in a bit. The new head of state is the chief of the army, uh, Senior General Min Aung Hlaing. He was supposed to basically age out of his position as senior army chief this summer. That isn't going to happen now because he's now the head of state. One thing that, Americans looking at this situation might need to bear in mind is that this isn't just about army and politics. Leong's family owns several major businesses that they have control of because of his position, and as a result, enjoy a fair amount of wealth that would be threatened if he lost his military position. So this is also about money and everything else. And down here at the bottom, you can see it. We've got a picture of Leong from Agence France and a picture of Aung San Suu Kyi campaigning in, I think, 2011. The coup has met widespread international condemnation, but no concerted action. And the biggest player in the area is China. And China has not condemned the coup. China has played a major role in kind of shaping events in Myanmar for a long time, managing them. Not necessarily determining them, but they have been concerned about their influence in that area. And what they have done is, throughout this whole period of civilian rule, tried to maintain good relations both with the civilian government and the military leadership. Their thing now is, well, this needs to be solved internally within Myanmar according to the terms of their constitution. And this is not a matter for foreign intervention or anything like that. And they will deal with whoever the constitution of Myanmar and the people of Myanmar decide are their rightful government. if China does not take a stand against this, it's kind of unlikely that the international community is going to be able to have much influence on it. Now, all of this is in response to what happened in November. In November, Aung San Suu Kyi's party, the National League of Democracy, won this landslide victory. They won 61% of the seats in parliament. And this is in a parliament where 25% of the seats are just automatically given to the military under the terms of the um, the agreement that had allowed for civilian government of any sort. The remaining percentage went to this party, the Union of Solidarity and Development Party, which is backed by the military. They are the civilian opposition to the National League of Democracy, except they're basically a mouthpiece for the army. After this major victory for the NLD, the Union of Solidarity and Development Party and the Army immediately charged widespread voter fraud, but had no evidence to back this up and have never presented any evidence to back this up. But they said that the results were fraudulent and the election needed to be reheld. The NLD said no, with the backing again of most of the international community. And this seems to have been what ultimately led the army to decide to simply step in and overthrow the results of the election. This is against a backdrop. I went into this a lot more detail back in November, but what was then Burma had been part of the British Empire. It became independent in 1948. The key leader in negotiating the end of British rule in 1948 was Aung San Suu Kyi's father. So she is part of a political dynasty in this country. Kind of like similar situation what I was just talking about in Ethiopia. Burma, although there is a ethnic majority, the Burmese, there are numerous ethnic minorities, a large Chinese population, the Rohingya, whose status is rather debated, various other peoples. It's always been a multi-ethnic country, and this was a problem, ethnic politics within the country right from the beginning. As minority parties pushed for more basic independence within Burma, the military in 1962 overthrew the existing government, imposed a new constitution, and ruled the country until 2011. Excuse me. In 2011, mostly out of a desire to have freer access to international markets, mostly economic concerns, the Army very reluctantly agreed to a kind of power sharing thing, which allowed limited elections under a new constitutional arrangement. Aung San Suu Kyi, who had been in prison for decades by that point for pro-democracy opposition to the government, became the leading voice in this coalition of pro-democracy parties that became the National League of Democracy, was elected to the head of state position and has held that ever since. She is wildly popular inside Myanmar, and this set the stage for this most recent set of elections. The NLDP has just continued to gain seats over the last several years until the big landslide in November. And this ultimately seems to have triggered this crackdown. So basically, the military is arguing that there was fraudulent election, that to protect the national integrity of the country, its unity, they have stepped in and eliminated this, gone back to the 2008 Constitution, which in essence allows the Army to rule unchecked. Where this is going to go now, again, who knows? Myanmar had been sort of opening up somewhat to the outside world, but still the democratic reforms were very much at the sufferance of the army. And the army has now decided that that's over. So the future of democracy in the country is, very shaky. Okay, questions? Anything about Myanmar? The coup there?
See you later.
Yeah, this is kind of what I had for today. These three things. If there's no questions, yeah, it sort of depends on a question in chat about how other countries are handling their vaccines. I mean, the vaccines are rolling out, and there is an international plan to ensure that the vaccines are available in poorer countries, but the plan is kind of ongoing. So, in places, like say Western Europe, in Japan, in Korea, this is rolling forward. They are, quickly vaccinating people as supplies are available. But it's it's early days with all of this, and so everybody's sort of in the position we are. A few countries are way ahead because they got their hands on a lot of doses, and so some countries are very quickly going through this process. They have more ample supplies relative to their total population than we do here in the United States. But it's very hit or miss. Everybody's kind of doing this for the first time right now, rolling out this sort of vaccine on this kind of scale. And so we're all kind of learning how to do it at the same time.
I'm going to ask, I missed the first part of your presentation, and you may have covered this already. Do you have any thoughts or comments about the number of vaccine doses that first world countries have claimed or committed to buying in terms of the total supply?
I have to admit, I really don't know the numbers. I know that I keep hearing these extravagant claims.
Yes.
And I don't know how real they are. I have no real insight into it. I have to admit, I'm questioning. I don't know that I'm skeptical, but I'm questioning because there are these very elaborate, very large we're going to roll out X number of doses in the next 3 months. And I'm seeing large scale efforts going on. I mean, one's going on right here on campus. But I'm also hearing endless stories, and there's endless stories in the news about shortages, lines, people unable to get access, especially in large urban areas. So I don't know what to think about that. I really don't.
Yeah, because I had read that first world countries have basically committed to buying about each of them 6 times they can inoculate the population 6 times over for what they've committed to purchasing. And I just, I wondered if you had heard any part of that, or, as far as kind of a, an extravagant claim.
I hadn't heard that particular number, but I mean, I've heard these, huge numbers coming here, and I mean, statements by the NHS in Britain about how much they're going to be rolling out and all of that. And I have to, I really don't know what the calculation is there, because of course, one of the big questions that nobody has an answer for is how long will this be effective for?
Right.
Are we going to start doing this again in a year or 6 months or 4 months? And so I think they're probably planning very big. And internationally, I don't see how, even with this plan, I'm blanking on the name, but there's like this international plan about ensuring access, like to third world countries, to the vaccine. That stuff always sounds good, but the reality is that the third world countries always wind up at a disadvantage. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of questions here about question in chat about isn't that along the same thought of not knowing how long people will keep the antibodies in their system if they got the virus? We're still in such early days with this. And it's worth bearing in mind, this is the first vaccine ever produced for a coronavirus. There simply had never been one before. So there's so much uncharted territory here about how this is going to work. Which I guess the big lesson is the one we keep hearing sort of on a personal level of, get your shot, but also keep wearing the mask, keep social distancing, because we're not done. We're nowhere near done. But I mean, when it comes to the production of these doses, their distribution, the ability of countries in Africa and several West African countries just recently kind of sounded the alarm bell about spikes in the number of cases that they're seeing. This is all just really don't know. Okay, any last questions? All right, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
See you in a month, maybe.